Okay, well, welcome to tonight's online training, financial governance for trustees. And you don't know about CAN, so we're a local infrastructure umbrella organisation supporting and promoting and talking on behalf of the local voluntary and community sector across BCP and Dorset. And this is our mission. And we do that through three functions of empowering, enabling, and connecting. Most of you, I think, are actually members anyway. But if you're not aware of the full range of benefits that you get, have a look at the website. And if you don't happen to be a member, then there's a link there to how you join. It's free. It doesn't cost anything. But have a look at that. And I would say to you that maybe not all of you are aware, but actually there is a membership zone on the website that's only open to members. So your main contact in your organisation will have been given the link to that. And it's got awful lot of useful stuff there. So policies and procedures, and there's stuff there about supporting trustees to carry out their functions. So if you haven't had a look at the membership zone, do that. And as I said, if you don't know how to get onto it, then talk to the main contact in your organisation. And if you don't know who that is, contact CAN, send a one to hello @ asking who's the main contact at your organisation, and we'll let you know who it is. As I said at the beginning, this is me. So I provide most of the one-to-one advice and support to charities, not-for-profits, voluntary and community groups across BCP. Avril does a similar job to me in Dorset Council area. But these are my contact details. So if you've got any questions after tonight or going forward, then in the first instance, try me. And it's always best to contact me on the mobile number rather than the main office number. Okay, so first of all, financial management. Why do we want to do? Why do you want to look at financial management? So what I'm going to do is ask you a question. What's the primary reason for charities to manage their finances? Now, you've only got one choice here. I know it's difficult, but choose one. So click on one of those. It's all anonymous, so don't worry. I'm not going to score you. Okay, that's everyone. Share the results. As I said, I think it's a bit of an unfair question. So all of these look pretty reasonable, don't they? About paying the bills, not to go bust, keep the charity running and deliver the charity objects. But majority of you went for the last one, deliver the charity objects. And the third one, keep the charity running. There is, I guess, a very subtle difference between the last two. So charities are there to make a difference, to create public benefit. They're not there to serve their own needs or their own self-existence. So I guess what there is there is a sort of dare I say theoretical concept that charities should do themselves out of a job, or they might actually decide in fact they're not the best organisation to make the difference that you want to set up, and therefore might close down, or they might merge with another charity. So if I had to choose one, I'd go with the last. It's about delivering the charity objects, so that actually it might sometimes challenge you to say, well, are we still the best charity to do that? Are we most efficient and effective to make the difference that we want to do? Nobody chose the first two, although again, you obviously want to pay your bills and not to go bust, but actually it's not the ultimate reason about why you want to manage your charity. So so looking after the money can seem to be like juggling lots of things at once. and there's obviously the danger of dropping stuff, and we're all human. Sometimes, difficult things we think, actually, I want to try and forget about that. I'll worry about it if it happens. But it is something that you can't avoid. Charities are there to make a difference to the communities that they serve, and therefore you've got an obligation really to look after the finances. But my next question is actually who is who's ultimately responsible? Okay, now this is a multiple choice one, so you can choose as many of these as you like. So who is ultimately responsible for the financial management of a charity? Okay, everyone's voted. Okay. So the correct answer is all trustees. So the buck stops with all of the trustees, not just with the treasurer or the chair. So that's great. Nobody chose that one, or with the bookkeeper and accountant. All the trustees share equal responsibility for financial management. Charity Commission don't. Basically, they say that actually it's down to the trustees to manage that. They will be there, I guess, as the sort of policing organisation to basically pick up the pieces if the charity trustees don't carry out those obligations. But what they'll do is they may put in a manager for a while, but they are still responsible to the charity. So they'll remove the trustees and they'll put in a temporary independent manager, usually a very highly paid accountant. It's not a member of the Charity Commission staff. Or they might even dismiss all the trustees and appoint new trustees to manage the charity. CEO manager, well, really, well, not really, they are answerable to the trustees. So you might delegate stuff to them, and I'll talk about delegation later on. But in terms of who is ultimately responsible, it is all of the trustees. Okay. So you've obviously signed up for this course, but I won't be making you into an accountant really. In this session, I want to point out, basically your responsibility as trustees and your fellow trustees collectively. And I'll probably give you some pointers about checklists and perhaps key questions for you to consider. Because actually each charity is slightly different. So it's probably quite difficult sometimes to give a pat answer that will answer every situation. But hopefully I'm giving you some things to think about within your own charity and how it operates and how it runs and looks after its finances, and that you can come up with a way of working that is good for you. You might obviously come to you want some certain stuff, some certain information from tonight. And I wonder if could you quickly just put in the chat box, could you just quickly type in, what do you want to take away from tonight's session? So if you click in chat, and then a little box should appear, and if you type in what you want to get out tonight. Hang on, I'll tell you what, there is only a small group of us. Shout out. Just unmute yourself and tell me what you want to get out of tonight. And I'll write it down.
I just want a general overview.
An overview, right, okay, that's fine.
Confidence that we are doing what is right.
what you mean. So checking that actually
Yeah.
your practice is on
Managing
on course.
financially.
Yeah. Okay.
And
Anyone
the
else?
correct policies and procedures are in place.
Okay. Some policies and procedures. Yep.
Yeah, basically
clear
reassurance.
Was that Paul? But what were we saying, Paul?
A clear understanding of what is required.
Required by who?
What is required by the Charities Commission, by what is
Okay.
required by what is required for trustees to manage the finances satisfactorily.
Okay. Now, somebody else was talking at the same time as Paul. So
That was me. Yeah. Sorry.
Oh, hey Mo. Sorry.
Basically, basically reassurance that what we as trustees or our board is doing when it comes to financial.
Yeah. So that's sort
So
of what Karen was saying about confidence that what you're doing is actually on track. Okay. Anyone else? Okay. All right. Okay. Well, I'll certainly cover most of those. As I said, it won't be in detail, but as like I said, you've got my contact details. So after tonight, if you've got an individual circumstance or a particular detailed question on your particular charity, then you just contact me and I'll try and answer the question. Okay, so now those who have done my trustee trainings know that I use this slide a lot, which is really the basic, this is the overriding principle that guides every decision a trustee should make. And that includes financial matters, always act in the best interests of your charity and its beneficiaries. And be clear about who your beneficiaries are. They could be people, they could be animals, they could be things, they could be the environment. It's whatever your charity is there to improve and support. And basically, as long as you can have evidence that you made a decision and you thought in the time with the evidence before you that the reason you took was in the best interests of the charity and its beneficiaries, then actually you're going to be protected, from any criticism from the Charity Commission or even the courts who ever went so far. They might say, okay, well, perhaps you should have done it slightly differently, but in fact, they'll excuse you from any long-term liability or responsibility. It's only if you knowingly act not in the best interest of your charity and its beneficiaries that actually you're probably going to end up being pulled through the courts, and you might be fined or you might actually be asked to repay something to the charity. But as I said, that's very, very rare, and it's only usually where there has been evidence that in fact you did either ignore advice you were given or you did know that it was not the right thing to do. Because generally trustees are expected to treat charity monies with the same degree of care and attention that they have of their own money. And although obviously you're doing it on behalf of the charity and its beneficiaries rather than yourself, so that's a slight difference. But in fact, the courts and the Charity Commission would say as long as you use the same level of degree of care and attention as you would managing your own financial affairs, then you'll be covered and you'll be fine. So if I break that basic duty down, there's two of them. There is this. It's basically to ensure the charity is well run and it's solvent and working towards its charitable purpose. And I've highlighted solvent because that's obviously a financial. Now, solvent has two definitions. One is that it can pay its debts when due. Okay. So people have changes in cash flow, the amount of ready money they have, it can go up and down, because perhaps your fundraising brings in a big dollop maybe, in July, or perhaps, you have a big expense that goes out, if you're doing if you're a charity that might end up doing a lot of its work around the winter, then actually a lot of expenses will go out in the back end of the year. So your finances can go up and down. So, but obviously you need to have enough ready money to pay any debts when it's due. So that's the first one. The second one is when you look at your end of year figures, and it's about having a positive balance sheet, which means that it can keep its head above water so it can continue to meet the urgent need in the future. So those are two things that you as charity trustees might need to ask questions of. Are we solvent? And using those two definitions. So sometimes charities, if you look at the end of year accounts, have a really healthy balance sheet. But actually, when you unpick it, it's maybe not so healthy. Like, for instance, maybe the balance sheet shows an awful lot of fixed assets. If you own a building, particularly somewhere in maybe BC, well, anywhere in Dorset, you might be talking about mega money. So actually your balance sheet could look like it's in the millions, but actually, have you got enough money to pay your staff in 3 months' time? And you obviously might not necessarily have that, even though you might have 3 million on your balance sheet. So those are two things you might need to sometimes ask anybody who's giving you reports about how solvent you are. And the other thing about having your good balance sheet is that the Charity Commission is clear that it expects charities to exist as long as there is a need for them to do so, but not to harm their beneficiaries because of a sudden closure. So this is where the concept of reserves comes in. I'll say a bit about reserves later on. So you want a healthy balance sheet because you want to know maybe that you are going to be a going concern for the next 12 months. So that actually you can carry, the charity can carry on operating without a sudden closure. And Kids Company is still the best example there of a very big national charity that closed overnight and dropped work with vulnerable young people. And then arguably perhaps that caused an awful lot of harm because of their sudden closure rather than a planned closure. And I've said already that you take ultimate responsibility, but you can't be everywhere 24/7. I know some of you are in very small charities that maybe you're quite involved day to day. Others of you are probably more distant and therefore aren't around seeing how the charity operates day to day, and you can't be there 24/7. So you are going to need to delegate some of those decisions and actions, including financial, but there needs to be clear delegations, and I'll say a bit more about that later on. So those of you who know this stuff is that the Charity Commission has this publication called The Essential Trustee, which is what it feels that all trustees should know. This is what their role and responsibilities are. And it separates them into those 6. And I'm going to bang through very quickly these 6, just pointing out where some of the financial responsibilities are, and they're in red. So, so ensuring your charity is carrying out its purposes for the public benefit, and the financial one is what your charity can and can't do within its purposes. So a basic tenet of charity law is that any of your assets, so that's cash, things, reputation, investments, must only be used to further your charitable objects. Therefore, when you're asked about any spend, you need to satisfy yourself that it falls within your objects. And if you do spend outside it, then that's one of the very rare occasions that the trustees could be liable to repay the charity out of their own pockets. But as I said, only if that was done knowingly. So for instance, the Charity Commission during the Ukrainian refugee crisis sent round one of their little posts to all charities, pointing out to charities that, okay, it's great that you might want to respond to the Ukrainian refugee crisis, but actually if you're going to make use of charity time, charity money, charity name, its charity number, like to raise money or to donate goods to the refugee crisis, it has to be within your objects. So they're making out that just because something is charitable or is good for the community, if it's outside your charitable objects, you must not do it. Okay. If you do it, and as I said, it's an honest mistake, you'll just be told don't do it again, or maybe think about changing your objects. But as I said, if you've done it knowingly, and I guess that was why the Charity Commission was sending around that that email to all registered charities was that to warn people that if they did do that, then they could face some personal responsibility. So these are the objects for one of the charities. And actually, I'm not even sure they're here tonight, but does anybody recognise that as your charitable objects? Is there anybody here from Hope for Food?
I'm not from Hope for Food, but that's very similar to our charity objectives.
Who's that? Sorry, I didn't see who that was.
That's Paul.
Okay, which one are you? Which charity are you from, Paul?
We're from Surplus for Dorset.
Surplus for Dorset. Okay, right. Okay, so this is Hope for Food's charitable objects. Okay, right. Okay, another little poll. I'm going to. Oh, hang on. Someone's asking something in the chat. Okay, that's right. Okay, so another little poll. So I'm going to ask you again. This is a multiple choice one. So if you read there, so I've in the poll, I've put their objects, and I'm asking you. So can they work in these places? Also, an awful lot of thinking happening. As I said, don't worry, this is anonymous. Has everyone voted who wants to vote? Oh, no. Of course, you might think none of these are correct. So, okay. I'll share the results. Right, it's tricky, this one. So everyone says work in Poole and Dorset Council area. Does everyone want to just tell me why they think that's correct?
Because that's a surrounding area of Bournemouth.
Okay, good. All right. 2 people said work in Devon. To be honest, I think that's okay. Does anybody who said Devon, why they thought Devon was okay?
Because it says surrounding areas in particular, but not exclusively.
Oh, that's for the next clause. But
I think the punctuation is confusing,
yes,
where the comma is.
Yeah. Surrounding is a vague term. And surrounding could be 5 miles, it could be 200 miles. So the person who ticks Scotland, I'd probably say you probably could be okay as well. The only thing is that actually charity law is different in Scotland and Northern Ireland. So if you're a charity registered in England and Wales, because if you might never notice, if you look at the Charity Commission website, it says that it's the Charity Commission for England and Wales. So if you're a charity registered in England and Wales, you can operate in Scotland and Northern Ireland as long as you don't have an office there, and as long as you don't undertake substantial fundraising in Scotland for work in Scotland. If you do, then you need to register with the Scottish regulator, and similarly if you do something in Northern Ireland. So probably any of your charities, if you're not just if you don't have a geographical restriction, then you could probably operate in Scotland. Nobody chose provide emergency furniture. Does anybody want to be brave enough to say why they wouldn't tick that one?
I thought it was because they were providing emergency food supplies.
Okay, so this is where Sue, I think, by it says here then, and surrounding areas in particular, but not exclusively by. So although their focus is providing emergency food supplies, then it's not saying that's their only way of addressing poverty.
Okay.
So actually providing emergency furniture would be okay, but as long as what's got to be the reason for providing the emergency furniture?
Preventing or relieving poverty.
Yes, because that's their charitable purpose. Their charitable purpose is the prevention and relief of poverty. The rest of this clause is just a description of how they do it. And they put that exclusively, but in particular, but not exclusively. So actually it does give some wriggle room. But I guess it's saying about that it's provide emergency food supplies, makes it clear that that's probably their main focus. So I would probably say, yeah, providing emergency furniture, as long as you could argue that it's to prevent or relieve poverty, that's fine. But then maybe if it starts to become perhaps more a bigger part of the work they did, I might think about perhaps changing that second clause. Giving debt advice. So 3 of you said that. Again, does anybody want to explain why they thought it was fine?
I put that because I felt that debt advice was instrumental in preventing or relieving poverty.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. So although it's not in that second clause, it's not about emergency food supplies, but it would be a service that would prevent or relieve poverty. And again, I would say, you know, if this charity wanted to do, you know, perhaps more than 25% of its work around debt advice, and less than 75% emergency food supplies, I might sort of tweak that second part of the clause. And then provide advice on healthy eating. Does anybody feel they want to share why they thought that was okay? Okay, I think it's fine, but it'll be the same caveat as emergency furniture. Okay. So you might want to say to people, well, rather than going out and, you know, eating McDonald's 7 days a week or whatever, because it's cheap, but actually there are ways to have a healthy diet on a restricted income, or to make use of food in a smarter way, stuff like that. So are people clear about that? That actually, those are the sorts of questions you need to have answers for when you're asked about any sort of financial spend or use of the charity assets. You know, is this, can we argue that this fits within our charity objects? As I said, it might be very worthwhile, it might be fulfilling a really urgent need, but actually if it's not in your objects, you shouldn't be doing it with charity assets. Okay. Right, let's move on. So the next one is complying with your charity's governing document and the law. And I got to hear about up to date with filing and accounts. I'm going to say a bit more about charity accounts later on, but all charities have to produce annual accounts. There's a legal requirement to provide those to anyone who asks, and some charities will then have to file them with the Charity Commission. And if you're a charitable company, also with Companies House. And so I'll say a bit more about that later. And as well as charity law, there are other laws that relate to finances. Does anybody want to suggest what other laws relate to financial operations?
Is it things like fraud and?
Yes. So there'll be stuff about fraud. I think the other obvious ones are around tax and probably HMRC in terms of employment. Those are going to be the main ones, but then you'll have stuff around bribery and fraud, and I'll say a bit more about fraud later on. But there are other laws, but I always have this big caveat in red. So Charity Commission and the courts know that trustees are not experts in charity law or quite other lots of laws, you need to know your limits. So if you don't know something, then you should ask a question of somebody who do. And quite often you can always start with can in your first instance, and then if we think it's too complicated, then we'll suggest you probably go and talk to, usually it's going to be an accountant if it's financial stuff, to get some expert advice. So the next one is acting in your charity's best interests. So it's about making balanced, informed decisions, being prepared to question and challenge. So it's good practice that there is probably some sort of item on your trustee board agenda about finances. And I was going to say something about reports to the board of trustees a bit later on. So it's somewhere where things can be explained to all the trustees, that they can discuss it and agree. And it could be things like your accounts. It could be interim reports, like quarterly accounts, comparing budget with actual. But it does mean you probably need to make it clear to whoever's giving you financial reports what you need to know. And I'm going to say a bit more about that later. And I have to say that that actually probably one of the best qualities of a trustee is perhaps to ask the seemingly stupid question. Quite often in meetings, you'll find there are other people at that meeting who've got exactly the same question as you, but they're perhaps a bit sort of wary about asking. They don't want to be seen to be, they don't know what they're talking about, or don't know enough. But actually, it's very good to ask those questions, to be a critical friend. And I'm going to put a slide up in a minute of sort of 15 questions that the Charity Commission recommends that trustees ask. This other one about ensuring trustee benefits are allowed. Now, charity law says that actually charity trustees can be reimbursed for reasonable expenses of being a charity trustee. So there will be stuff like travel, it might be even carer costs. None of you are sort of like, well, some of you might have trustees who live a long way away, and that actually if you have in face-to-face meetings, there might be accommodation costs to be covered. So all of that is perfectly fine as long as they're reasonable, and they're to reimburse people for carrying out their role as a trustee. But your governing document, so it'll either be called Constitution or Articles of Association, will have sections about trustee benefits. So you need to check what they say as well and follow it to the letter. If a trustee gets a benefit that is not covered by law or not covered by the governing document, then they're likely to be called unauthorized benefits. And if that's the case and the Charity Commission gets involved, then they could go to court to ask the trustee to pay those back. So you need to really always check your governing document to see what it says about trustee benefits. I talked about this. This is the sort of 15 questions. As I said, you'll get a copy of the presentation in the next few days, so you can look at this, and there's a link to it on the Charity Commission website. So there are 15 questions here, of which 9 have some sort of connection to financial, and there's obviously a very pertinent one about current economic climate. You know, how is that going to impact on your beneficiaries, but also maybe how it might impact on your ability to raise money. So the Charity Commission thinks, you know, that you use this as a prompt sheet across a year or 2 years, that you should ask yourselves these sorts of questions. and some of them, aren't pertinent, like actually the one over on the far left, how can we make best use of any permanent endowment investments we hold? I'm not sure if any of you do have permanent endowments. So that's dollops of money that you've been given where you're told you can't spend it, but you can invest it and spend the interest from it. It's what most charities would just love to have because it gives them complete independence. And that's obviously how most grant-making trusts survive. That's how, for instance, that's how the Talbot Village Trust, it's got these huge investments which it can't sell, but actually it has either interest or rents, like from Bournemouth University, and all the ground rents on the Talbot estate, and basically then uses that money to make its grants to local organisations. So a useful prompt sometimes, this 15 sheets. So the next one is about managing your charity's resources responsibly. So managing risks. So every now and again, charity trustees might need to think about the risks that they have, including fraud. I'll say a bit more about that later. And thinking about how it can mitigate any of those risks. It's also about protecting assets, and that includes insurance. Basically, the Charity Commission does expect charities to take out insurance because it's an obvious way of protecting the finances of the organisation. So if somebody goes to court and proves negligence, actually it'll come out of your insurance company rather than the charity's coffers if there's a payout. If something is stolen through fraud or through theft, actually you've got insurance maybe to replace it rather than losing maybe an asset that will really impact on your charity's ability to deliver services. Next one's getting the resources your charity needs. So as I said earlier, charity trustees' responsibility is to ensure the charity is solvent. And one of the ways you can try and see that is by agreeing an annual budget and getting a report, maybe quarterly, about how well is that going? Is it still accurate? Is there some sort of a hole appearing between our income and expenditure? Making sure something's going to happen about that. Or like, for instance, maybe increased fundraising or maybe cutting back on services. But it might not be your job to do that. Your job as a trustee is really to identify there's a problem and to make sure something is going to happen. Now, it might be a trustee goes off and does that, or if you've got staff, you might delegate that to a member of your staff to look at increased fundraising, come back with some ideas, or you might ask your manager, chief executive, to think about, well, where can we find savings? But the other end of the scale is you might have more money than you need. I know some of you might think, oh God, that's never going to happen, but it can happen. And then the trustees might be asked about, well, how shall we use this excess money? What more community benefit can we deliver from the services we provide? Having and following appropriate controls and procedures. I'm going to say a bit more about these later on. So as I said, you can't be everywhere all the time. So you probably need to sign off on controls and procedures that everyone else has to follow, whether they're staff or a volunteer or even another trustee. And you need to feel confident because the ultimate responsibility is with you, but actually that will make you legally compliant, and you make everybody aware of those policies and procedures. And in a sense, you've done as much as you can. If people want to commit fraud, most fraud is internal, they will find ways around any system. But as long as you've got it recorded that you actually said, this is our way of recording money when it comes in, you've checked that everyone's had a copy of it, that they understand it, then you're fine, you're covered. So financial policies. so these are the ones that the Charity Commission expects or highly recommends you have. And probably the first and most important one is financial controls. And I've got a slide in a minute that goes into a bit more detail. But every year, one of the things that registered charities have to fill in is a thing called the annual return. And one of the questions that's on that return is, in the past 12 months, have the financial controls and procedures been reviewed by the trustees? So they expect charity trustees to look at this at least once a year. It might be fine, you might not have to do anything about it, but at least as the document's been shown in front of you, and you've asked questions about, well, is it working? Are there any problems? Is nothing not clear? And you've edited it and agreed a new version. I said there's sort of like charity law does allow trustees to claim reasonable expenses of being a trustee, but it's a good idea to at least have a written policy about it. It can be quite simple, but at least there is a written policy that it's clear for everyone about what you can and cannot claim and how it's claimed. Reserves policy. Charity law says that income should be spent as soon as possible to achieve public benefit. Therefore, charities can't squirrel money away to develop more and more of a war chest. It's not like private sector companies, which are basically all about improving the shareholder value of the company. They want to see the balance sheet go up all the time. Charity law doesn't allow that. You should use money, charitable money, as soon as you can, as I said, to carry out activities that deliver public benefit. But it's prudent financial management to basically make sure that you've got money to cover possible future costs. So actually you can carry on, year out. So all charities are either told to, in their annual report, to say they don't have charity reserves, or if they do have charity reserves, to then have explain why they keep them and at what level, how much money or how many months. And it shouldn't be some sort of figure plucked out of the air. There needs to be a bit of an argument that a person in the street could argue about, well, why are we saying it's £10,000, or why are we saying it's 2 months of expenditure? It needs to be very clear to people about why you're keeping money back into reserves. And quite often a reserves policy will cover like the closure costs, because you want to close in a planned way. But then you might want to have a set of money to replace any money lost, or to basically help look after your beneficiaries. So for instance, I'm the treasurer of a small childcare charity, does out of school childcare. And we know it can take parents and carers perhaps 2 to 3 months to find alternative childcare arrangements. So our reserves policy is our current closure costs. So that might be any rent and energy that costs that we need to cover, rent and notice pay, redundancy pay of the staff. And then on top of that, we have a minimum of 2 months and a maximum of 3 months of operational costs, so that we can give our parents and carers at least 2 months notice. But we would never keep more than 3 months worth. And if we do, then we'll look at doing something else. So we were luckily 6 years ago to have additional £5,000. So what we did was we did a capital improvement on the childcare building, so that actually we were improving the experience of the children that we had childcare for. Reserves policy is a whole ball game, but quite happy to have conversations with individual charities about what might deem to be reasonable. There's no right or wrong answer, but it needs to be seen to be reasonable. Investment. Charity Commission says that all charities should have an investment policy, but to be honest, most of you, if you're lucky, might have a simple instant savings account. It's really aimed at charities that have got long-term investments in stocks and shares and stuff like that. But you might want a very simple statement that basically, you know, you need money instantly, therefore you might keep an instant savings account, and you might sort of every couple of years just shop around to see if there's something giving a better rate of return. Obviously, for the last sort of almost 10 years, diddly squat in savings account. Obviously, it's slightly changing now, but a very simple policy will do. And I've already mentioned about risk management. So risk management will include stuff around financial stuff, but again, it depends on how big or how complex your charity is and the potential risks in place. But the obvious ones are going to be, you know, lack of income for whatever reasons. You know, it could be your investments, or it could be fundraising. Costs might go up, and obviously that's a big issue for an awful lot of charities at the moment, with inflation running up. Well, it depends what you read and at what month you read it at, but that's going to have an impact on you, and obviously stuff around fraud and theft. So risk management, you know, would identify the issue, what you can do to mitigate it or reduce the risk. I said about internal financial controls. So there is guidance of CC8, and when you get these slides, there'll be a link to it on the channel. It has a very useful checklist. So basically, your controls, you know, are about how it protects the charity assets, identifies and manages the risk and conflicts of interest, loss, waste, bribery, theft, or fraud, ensures that financial reporting is robust and of sufficient quality, ensures trustees comply with charity law and regulation. And it'll be different for each charity, but we have a template if you haven't got anything in place or you want to check about whether yours is fit for purpose. The other basic thing it has is about segregation of duties. So if only one person has complete control over all your financial activity, then the risk of fraud is increased enormously, because obviously they can sign off something, they can raise a check or a backs payment, and they can sign and authorize it off, and it all happens. Whereas if you try and separate it out between at least two people, then the risk becomes much lower unless they actually work together. But obviously the Charity Commission does like charities to try and segregate duties as much as they can. I know it can be really difficult with small charities, but if you can find ways of doing it, it would be better. And that actually your internal controls need this annual review so that you can tick the box on the annual return. But as I said, no system can provide a guarantee. You can have the most robust, most fantastic policy going, control, overseeing fraud and that, but people will find ways around it. They always do. But at least you've discharged your responsibility by having these written down, reviewing them regularly, and making sure that everyone's aware of them. So act with reasonable care and skill. So as I said, you're not experts. This is about act with reasonable care and skill. So deciding when you need advice, you're not experts. Preparing for meetings. So, you know, hopefully before a meeting comes along, you'll be sent the financial report so you can have a look at it. Prepare questions about stuff you don't understand, or maybe even start to form an opinion when you're asked to make a decision. Getting the information you need, particularly financial. I'll say a bit more about reports later on, but I think this is something you as a board of trustees need to agree together. Don't just take what you're given. You have a conversation with whoever prepares the reports. It could be a treasurer, you might have a bookkeeper, it might be your manager, your CEO, but you need to be clear with them what you want to see in the reports. And then being prepared in case something goes wrong. Again, it depends how big or how complex a charity you are, but it could be a back of the fag packet. type plan. Doesn't have to be long, but basically being clear what happens if you do lose money, or your sources of income are less than you had planned, so that actually you know something, what you're going to do about it, rather than suddenly thinking, what should we do? This one is about meeting your legal, accounting, and reporting requirements. There are special rules on charity accounting, and I'll cover those a bit in a minute. And you need to file your reports to the Charity Commission within 10 months of year end. And if you don't, you get a red flag. If you've never seen it, go and look at, I was looking at it today, Lower Central Gardens. This is in Bournemouth. Is actually a charity. Its sole trustee is BCP Council, and they were late with their accounts by 1 day, so it's gone red on the page around accounts. And the reason why I say that it's important to do that is because quite often, quite a lot of funders will look at the reporting page to see whether a charity is behind on its reporting or not, because the Charity Commission quite rightly says that if a charity can't file its accounts within 10 months of year end, then actually it should worry you about what else they can't manage in running a charity. So make sure that that's done. And the Charity Commission doesn't accept any excuses, really. A couple of years ago, they did a survey and asked people why they were late, and there were some ones that actually you just can't believe people said it. You know, the back of the car flew open and all the accounts blew away down the motorway, or the dog ate them. But they don't even allow excuses like our treasurer died. What they would say is then that the trustees should have found alternative arrangements for the bookkeeping, or make sure that there were backups that could be accessed by the other trustees. So it's by not doing your accounts on time, usually the Charity Commission will say that that is misconduct or mismanagement in the administration of a charity, which is their catch-all bog standard slap on the wrist for charities. So if you do delegate it, then make sure it gets done. So each of you has individual responsibility. Okay, so no one trustee has more responsibility than any other, but you can share it and delegate it. So delegations. Does anybody want to give me some ideas about who the trustees could delegate financial decisions to? Some ideas within your organisation?
By having a subcommittee within your board,
Yeah.
who is responsible for financial matters.
Yeah. Okay. So some sort of finance committee or other committee. Yeah. Any other role, post?
Do you mean like an external bookkeeper? Or?
Yeah, could be a bookkeeper. Yeah, or internal finance officer.
Yep.
Yep. Somebody who's got
Payroll.
some payroll. Yes, payroll. So that usually quite often that's obviously somebody that's external. Anyone else? Okay, put you out of your misery. Here's a list. So it could be subcommittees. It could be officers. So it could be the chair, treasurer, if you have them, or the trustee board. You might actually delegate some decision making to them. If you've got staff as an organisation, then you might quite often delegate some financial responsibilities to your chief executive or manager, whatever you want to call them. Again, if you've got some sort of paid person, a finance officer, bookkeeper, whatever you want to call it, and even frontline staff and maybe volunteers, you know, you might say to them that maybe they're allowed to go and spend £10 on certain things without actually getting permission from anyone else. So even that is a delegation. But, you know, basically they need to be documented, and they could be documented in different places. Your financial controls thing might set out what people can and cannot decide on. You might, if you're a bigger organization, you might even have a scheme of delegation saying that the chair can authorize this, the chair and the treasurer can authorize up to this amount, the chief exec can authorize up to a lower amount, and staff a much lower amount, and so on. Terms of reference for things like subcommittees, again, might set out what decisions they can and cannot make. And then you might have various policies and procedures, again, that might say, you know, members of staff, perhaps in the expenses policy, can perhaps, you know, agree expenditure up to £10 without getting authorization or permission from anyone else. But these all have to be done according to what works for your charity. You know, there isn't going to be a one size fits all. But it must be a way that's clear, set out in writing, and with clear reporting back to the board and regularly reviewed. So obviously a very common delegation is to a treasurer. Now, you know, I am a long-standing treasurer. I am actually the treasurer for the childcare charity that I'm a trustee for, and have been for 15 years. And there are lots of stereotypes about treasurers. You know, basically, they're a miser. They don't allow anybody to spend anything. They just want to keep all the money in the bank, keep the bank balance as high as possible. And there's lots of received wisdom about what the role is about, and what they can and cannot do. But there is nothing in law that says you have to have one. It's up to each charity to decide whether they want to have a treasurer and what that role is. But it is a very, very common role. As I say, it's not required by law. And what it is, it's really a lead trustee on finance related topics. So it's somebody who might actually get a bit more background knowledge about the finances, where the income comes from, what sort of expenditure there is, can work with people in the organization to do perhaps some financial planning, forward planning, as well as reporting. And really what there should be, a good treasurer is a sounding board for financial people, and help other trustees with their financial responsibilities. But I know that getting a treasurer is probably the most difficult role to fill on a trustee board. And sometimes you're just thankful that somebody's happy to deal with figures and spreadsheets. But really, you should try and educate, upskill that person to also be a good interpreter, so that actually they can explain finances to other trustees, most of whom probably aren't very happy looking at spreadsheets and financial reports. But a treasurer, it is a delegated role, and so they need a clear role description. We've got some samples, and a clear delegation about what decisions they can make and how they should report to the board. But, and I put this emphasis here, that actually all trustees have an equal responsibility and for overseeing the organisation's financial risk management. So even though you have a treasurer, don't leave the poor person really to take everything on their shoulders. You know, being a treasurer sometimes can feel like all the responsibilities on your shoulders. Conversely, though, you don't want a treasurer who is too dominant, and basically they're seen as the expert and you all kowtow to what they say. And that will mean is that actually your collective responsibility is going to be weakened. Right. Okay, I think we'll take a 5-minute break at that point. Yeah, okay. I make it, well, 5 minutes. Yeah, okay. I'll see you all back in 5 minutes time. Elaine and Delilah, are you there?
Yeah, yeah, I'm here, Steve.
Who's that? I can't see.
Oh, sorry, Delilah.
Okay, right. Okay. Before I do this, start the second. Have anybody got any questions at this point from that first half? No. Okay. Well, storm up to the end. Okay. So, what should you, as a committee, agree should be in place then, if you've got a collective responsibility? You know, hopefully all of you would be there voting on what should be in place for your charity. So a financial system. So basically, you should have a financial plan. So that's a budget. And at least at the beginning, or at the beginning of the financial year, preferably before it starts, sometimes it can obviously drift. You don't know until actually maybe the first month or the second month of the financial year. You should have a budget that's detailed enough so that it makes sense to you as a trustee. And basically, you should have it regularly checked to see whether it's still up to date and whether there are any issues for you as trustees to have to think about. And quarterly is normal. And sometimes they're called management accounts, where you compare a budget against actual. And then you should look to diversify income and have clear policies to maintain a healthy cash flow by efficiently dealing with income and expenditure. I'll talk a bit more about income in a moment. And then also you need to make sure that there are accurate accounting records that are kept up to date. Charity Commission reckons at least monthly. Obviously, if you're a larger charity, you'll probably do it, you know, as and when all the time. But for very small charities, you know, it should at least be done no longer than a month, being kept up to date. So you can easily answer the question, what is your financial position if asked? And then you have these effective controls, which is like the policies and procedures I talked about earlier. Okay, so income. So do people want to just shout out what sources of income do you think a charity has? Where could your income, what types of income does a charity typically get its money from?
Donations.
Donations, okay.
Trading.
Trading, yeah. Selling stuff.
Grants.
Grants, yeah.
Fundraising.
Fundraising, so it would be like community fundraising and
Yeah.
stuff like that. Yeah. Okay. Yep. Okay. So they're pretty obvious. I've separated them into two because it's quite useful that they are two different types. So you've got like the gift income. So people give you money, not expecting anything in return. So that's your grants, donations. Legacies. A lot of local charities don't tend to think about legacies, but there's nothing to stop you doing it. I've known some local charities get quite significant legacies, you know, from people perhaps who have been users, either from the user when they've died, or maybe from a family member that has benefited because of someone else in the family from the work of the charity. So I think it's something that's worth thinking about. And then you've got your community fundraising type stuff. And then you've got earned and trading income. Nobody mentioned this, but contracts. Some of you might have contracts to deliver, particularly if you're doing stuff in the public sector. You know, the last 20 years, 30 years even, there's been sort of a move for many public bodies to move from grants to contracts, and contract is earned income. Then you've got sales of stuff, and again, community fundraising, which I'll talk about. The other thing, of course, you have is interest. So if you do have money squirreled away, then hopefully you might be earning some interest on it as well. I think you as charity trustees, part of your role is to ask questions about diversifying your income. It seems pretty obvious that actually if you've only got one form of income and maybe only one supplier of that income, you are at real risk. So if you rely on one person or one organization giving you all your money, and then they decide not to do that any longer, then all your income is turned off. So a good idea is to try and make sure you've got a basket of funding so that if one does go down for some other reason, it might not totally jeopardize the financial future of your charity. It might cause a problem to begin with, but at least it won't mean that you completely collapse. And again, using the example of Kids Company, they were reliant on a single government contract. And when the government basically said, we're not going to carry on with this, they basically decided to close the following day. So, earned income. Hang on, no, that's right. Sorry, I'm going to talk about so looking at sort of the gift income side, fundraising. The Charity Commission over the last couple of years has said that charity trustees ought to be a bit more aware of what fundraising is being done in their charity as a name. So you need to be aware about what's carried out. You don't need to know the detail, but you ought to know actually what fundraising is being carried out and that it's being done lawfully and maybe according to good practice. And if you don't know about the fundraising code, it is the sort of first stop shop on anything to do with fundraising. When you get the slides, there'll be a link to it. And basically it covers any sort of fundraising, whether it's grants, whether it's community fundraising, challenge events, running lotteries, sales, stuff like that. And basically it tells you the legal do's and don'ts, but also good practice. And it's a non-statutory code, but the Charity Commission expects all charities to follow it. And if not, to explain why they didn't. So it's one of those codes. Do it, even though you haven't got to do it, but you've got to do it. So the other thing, of course, you have to be aware of is any anonymous large donors. Certainly not cash, not like Prince Charles when he was Prince Charles, having Tesco's bags of money from be taken away for his charity. I think a lot of us are gobsmacked that the Charity Commission didn't actually come down harder on the Prince's Trust really for this, because it's everyone else, they say it's a no-no to accept large amounts of cash donations, even though they knew who it was from. But anyway, you just be aware about anonymous large donors.
Could you just give some idea of what one we should regard as large?
Right, okay. I would say 25k. But basically, that's only because in the past there's been some guidance on other things around, for instance, what's a significant loss to a charity? And the Charity Commission says 25,000. They've never ever given a figure about what's a large donor. I usually say to people, one, try and get everyone to give it through a bank if they can, because then you're discharging your responsibility about money laundering onto the bank. And anonymous here means anonymous public. You should know who it is, but you can keep their name anonymous to the public. Yep. I would try to avoid any large donation, certainly cash, and certainly not anonymous, because it'll be money laundering. That's the problem. And the other thing to be aware of is restricted and unrestricted. And I've got a slide later on. So sometimes money is going to be given to you and you have to be clear that it's restricted as opposed to unrestricted. So I'll explain that a bit later. Okay. So trading and earned income. So what is trading? Okay, so I have another little poll for you to do. Okay, this is multiple choice, so you can choose as many of those as you like. Okay, right, everyone's had their go, share the results. Okay. If you're being purist, it's the last one. So trade is where you exchange something of value. So I will give you this if you give me that. Doesn't matter whether you're trying to make a profit. Doesn't matter whether you sell it for cost or whether you sell it less than cost. What it is, it's about it's about an exchange of something that both of you value. So here's my definition. So in a sense, you know, that's why bartering is trading. So you're not exchanging money at all. You're exchanging goods of that both of you deem is of the same value, for instance. But you can sell stuff at less than cost. You know, it's subsidized, or it's a loss leader, or it's, you know, trying to get it off of your hands as quick as possible. I was in my local Sainsbury's yesterday, and there was 1.75 litre bottles of Robinson's double strength squash for 15p. So I bought 3 of them. Well, obviously, it costs a lot more than 15p, so it's being sold at a loss, but it was a trade. Charities can trade if your governing document allows it. So there will be something probably in what the powers section that will say something that, well, in fact, it will probably say as long as you do not partake in permanent taxable trading, which means that you can trade if it directly achieves your objects. Okay, I'll explain this in a bit more in a minute, but you need to check your governing document first. If it says, and I really doubt that it does, that thou shalt not trade, thou shalt not sell stuff, then you can't do it. If it's got something like permanent taxable trading, or even permanent trading, you'll be fine. You can trade as long as you can do this second bit, that it's within charity and tax law. So my charity, childcare, we sell childcare places, and our charitable objects are to provide out of school education and social activities. So we can trade as much as we like. We can sell as much childcare places as we like, because it helps us to directly deliver on our objects. If you sell something that is not directly related to your objects, then it's actually seen as raising money, not charitable work. And then you need to follow the rules, so it stays below a statutory minimum. And that's usually called non-primary purpose trading. And if you go above that level, and it's on a sliding scale, so it depends on your turnover. But if you go above that statutory minimum, you're going to be subject to corporation tax in the same way that a private sector company is. And the Charity Commission might turn around and say that you're no longer carrying out exclusively charitable purposes, and therefore you could lose your charitable status. So there's some guidance on the charity on our web membership zone. And in fact, I did a webinar last week about trading as a charity. So if you're interested in that in more detail, then contact me and I'll send you the stuff from the webinar last week. So it's a bit complicated, but you as charity trustees need to ask yourself, or need to ask, if you are selling stuff, are we able to do this legally? You know, can we do it within charity and tax law? And hopefully get the answer. And there are lots of exemptions, unfortunately. So, for instance, most fundraising is trading. If you think about it, you know, like you can come to our disco if you give me 10 quid. So you can't get into the disco unless actually you hand over 10 quid. So it's trading. And it won't be related to your charitable objects. It's really to raise money for the charity. But there's an HMI exemption over fundraising relating to those community fundraising activities. And again, that's why the fundraising code is always important to be checked, that you're following the rules for any of that fundraising, so you doesn't get deemed as non-primary purpose training. But I think the question you come away from tonight is, if you are trading in your charity, ask the question, you know, are we doing it legally? Fraud. Okay. So another little poll for you to answer. Okay, single choice. Well, that's interesting. Actually, the correct answer is the same, but some of you obviously think it's more common in charities. Quite often, some people think it's less common in charities. Oh, nobody's going to steal from a charity. They won't take our money away. But actually, it's exactly the same. So it is important to not put your head in the sand and think about what won't happen here. So, so there's some common guidance around to help prevent fraud. So instill a culture of ethical behaviour. So it's about beefing it up so that people perhaps feel a bit more guilty if they were to carry out fraud. But also it's probably so that people might whistleblow. And it is lower down, but actually if they do become aware, they think that someone is undertaking fraud. And most fraud is internal. You know, if you look at all the statistics, most of it is done by people within the organization, even with things like cyber attacks and phishing type emails. Most fraud is still internal fraud. And the other thing is that actually it's not usually because somebody has sort of deliberately become a volunteer or a member of staff of an organization to defraud it. It's usually somebody who's been there for a while and then their personal circumstances change. You know, basically they become financially insecure through reasons. It could be, you know, an addiction to something, or it could be that their family's fallen on hard times and they find it too much of, you know, becomes, they feel their only way out of it is to actually steal money from the charity. Develop some anti-fraud policy, and again, like any policies, it's horses for courses. It depends how big an organisation you are, but having some clear policy down about actually how you will try and prevent fraud. So understand the risks and regularly reassess. So that's part of your financial controls. You know, test it. Where are the weaknesses? Implement robust financial controls and reinforce the importance of these. So that's why things like dual authorization, you know, that actually the Charity Commission expects all charity expenditure to be signed off by 2 people. So that's a very basic anti-fraud device, as I said earlier. Get 2 people to sign on something means that they've got to collude together. But what it does mean, though, is if, for instance, you are a signatory on the bank account and you're asked to countersign it, either electronically or if you still are using paper checks, you know, you should be given evidence. Don't just sign it because somebody else has signed it. You want to see the invoice and satisfy yourself that actually, you know, that this is legitimate expenditure, and ask questions. And you never ever sign blank checks. I came across a charity. I came across a charity 2 months ago where actually the treasurer was doing that. You know, they went round to another trustee once a month and got the other trustee to sign 5 blank checks. You know, of course, nothing's gone wrong in that charity for 20 odd years, but you can never say never. Robust recruitment procedures. So, you know, if you are employing or taking on people to look after financial stuff, you might want to get proper references for them, even if they're a volunteer. Basically, you know, make sure everyone's aware of your anti-fraud measures and training staff, develop a whistleblowing policy, and keep records of suspected and confirmed fraud, and do something about it. So that might obviously immediately informing the police, and the Charity Commission would expect that. And I know some charities in the past, again, you know, us being, you know, nice and understanding, and we can understand why people have been tempted to defraud a charity because of their circumstances. But the Charity Commission does expect that actually, if there is fraud, that you do report it to the police, and then actually make a report to the Charity Commission as well. Okay, reporting on the money. So I just explained slightly, charity accounting is very different. So restricted funds is where it's donated income from the gift economy that's been given where the donor has said it's for a particular purpose. So most grants will be that, you know, it's for you apply to a trust for a particular project. They said yes, so actually it's being given to you to spend on that project. You might be doing a fundraising appeal to buy a bit of kit or to fund for a particular person, and therefore if the people give you money for that, you've got to keep it for that purpose. So it's restricted funds. Unrestricted is where actually the trustees have where it's not been given on trust, and therefore the trustees can decide how it's given. So someone loves your charity and gives you 200 quid, you do great work, so that's unrestricted. So the trustees can decide whether to spend that on, you know, phones or a new member of staff or buying some paper or whatever. You have complete freedom, so that's unrestricted. And interestingly enough, most contracts will be unrestricted. And that might seem a bit strange, because if you're doing a contract, well, for instance, our contract says that we've got to deliver advice to 20 older people across the year. But it's not, it's unrestricted. It's because you're covered by contract law, not by trust law. So that basically, if you deliver the service and it costs you less, so you're given 10 grand and you only spent 9,500 of it, then actually you can keep the 500 quid and you can use it for whatever you like. Whereas if it was a grant for £10,000 and 9,500 was spent, the £500 trustees can't decide how to spend that £500. They have to go back to the donor and say, do you want it back, or can we use it for something else? And if they give you permission to do that, then that's fine, but you have to go back to the donor. In restricted funds, you've got endowment funds. I mentioned those earlier. Probably none of you are lucky enough to have these, but it's large dollops of money where you can't spend it, but you can invest and use the interest on things that trustees are happy to do so. and then restricted income would be anything else. Under unrestricted funds, these are going to be your reserves that you might have. So designated funds are reserves where you've got some sort of planned expenditure in the near future, like replacing a minibus, repairing the roof of the building you're in. You might have decided you've won a project where you're going to employ someone for 2 years on a particular piece of work. So you've designated it and you've got a clear plan for that expenditure. And general funds, sometimes called free reserves, is stuff that you've got back. And that's sometimes important. So free reserves, quite often grant-making trusts will have a criteria that if you've got more than, let's say, 12 months free reserves, they won't give you money because they said you should be using that. It's charitable funds that you don't really need, and therefore you should be spending it on this new piece of work. So, for instance, the National Lottery Communities Fund is one of their criteria. If you've got more than 12 months free reserves, general funds on that diagram, then they will just reject your application out of hand. So again, when you're looking at reports on your funds, you need to be clear, or it needs to be made clear to you what's restricted and what's unrestricted, what's our designated funds and what's our general reserves. So reports. So two types of reports. You've got your annual accounts and report, and best practices, they should give a reader a good idea of the state of your finances and what you have achieved with the money spent. And you also have probably board reports. Now, for both of those, although there are accounting principles that everyone accepts, there is always going to be someone will have to take a view. That you can have a set of facts placed in front of you, but there could be at least a couple of different views. Is this good? Is this bad? Should we do this? Should we do that? So this was once told to me by one of the sort of leading charity accountants in the country, who said, you know, I take a view as an accountant, you know, challenge me on it. If you don't think I'm right, or you don't understand why I've taken that view, you know, ask me to explain it to me. And if you've got a different view, explain it to me and we'll have a discussion about it. So sometimes just because it's written down on paper, or it's written down someone with an awful lot of letters after their name, don't take it that that's gospel, that it's fact. It might be their opinion. So the annual accounts and report it's the responsibility of the trustees to produce this. So it will go at some point to a trustees meeting to be signed off. It's not the job of the AGM. I sometimes come across charities who think that the annual accounts report can only be signed off at an AGM. That's not the case. It's a responsibility of the trustees. What goes to an AGM, if you have them, is for a bit of external scrutiny by the wider membership. They don't get to approve it, they might accept it. So there's a subtle difference between the two, but actually it's for them to ask questions and for the trustees maybe to be challenged, but actually they get approved by the trustees. And these two things go together, the annual accounts and the report. So the report is sometimes called the trustees annual report. So that's really, that describes the difference the money has made across the year. And the accounts are just sort of like the figures work, but the two always go together. So usually if you see someone asking for your accounts, they usually will see the two bits, the trustees annual report, the narrative, and then the sort of like table of figures. And all charities have to produce it. They have to provide a copy to anyone who asks them for nothing. So it's a right of anyone in the public to ask a charity for its latest accounts and report. But you have to follow rules and guidance about what is in them. And we have staff. The Charity Commission has staff as well. we've got templates, and there are sort of two types of accounts. All charitable companies have to follow what's called the full charity SORP, so it's quite complicated. So again, you as trustees, if you're a trustee of a charitable company, you should ask the questions like, are we following the charity SORP? You're not expected to know what that is. You just ask the question, and hopefully you get a satisfactory answer. If you're not a charitable company like a CIO or a charitable trust, you can use simpler receipts and payments, which is just about cash in and out, as long as your annual income is less than $250,000. And then there's this thing about it being checked by someone. So if your annual income is more than 25,000, then it must have an independent examination. And it's up to the trustees to decide who it is examined by. Somebody you feel is got enough knowledge to do independent examination. There's guidance for trustees on the Charity Commission website, and there's also guidance for the examiner themselves. And then once you hit the million mark, most of you say, oh, if ever, then it has to be a full audit, and you obviously have to use a qualified auditor, and that's in that case. And then once you do your annual accounts, although it's available to the public, all CIOs have to send those to the Charity Commission. Whereas for other charities, charitable companies or charitable trusts, only if the income is more than 25,000. So as part of your annual return, you get asked to upload a copy, and then it goes onto the Charity Commission website for anybody to see anyway. And you might delegate this. You might delegate it to an accountant or your independent examiner. You might delegate it to a manager. You might delegate it to a finance officer. But actually, it's your responsibility to make sure it does get filed. So I would have like an item some point around the year just for it to be reported to you that actually it has been filed, because if not, you'll be the one that's held responsible, not the person who didn't do it. And as I said earlier, you've got 10 months of year end to send it in, or else you get red flagged. If you're a charitable company, you have to file your report and accounts within 9 months, which is a bit of a pain. It's a month earlier. So again, if you're a charitable company, then again get a report to you that actually it's been properly filed. And it's for Companies House, you get fined if it's a day late or a minute late, even, and the fines go up pretty quickly. So for board reports, I think there are sort of 3 elements that need to be into any board report, right? So remember, charities are about making a difference. So you want something related to the results, the difference that the money has made, and that you've done it in the most efficient way, getting as many bangs for your bucks. And then you want to know, well, how much cash you've got, like I said before, so that you've got enough money in the bank to pay liabilities that are coming up and meet your obligations short and longer term. And then actually, well, how much reserves have you got short and long term, again, to ensure sustainability, and maybe if needed for an orderly closure. So some things about looking at your reports, ask these questions. What key financial numbers do I need? As I said earlier, I think quite often trustees are just served up with reports. You probably should have a discussion at a board meeting about actually what the financial reports look like, and agreeing what financial numbers do I need. You don't need to know all the payments in and out in every month or in every quarter. You need just top line figures, but you need to tell whoever does the report what figures you need. I'll give you an example in a minute from my charity, what I mean by that. And also, if you just get a spreadsheet or a table of figures, that's not going to tell you anything. So it needs some narrative. So it's it should, you know, if there's nothing there, there's probably nothing to worry about. If there's a problem, there should be a bit of a narrative there, you know, saying this is a problem, telling you why, and maybe some options. And if you've got to get that a week before your trustee board meeting, then hopefully you can have a think about actually what your view might be. But actually, I think just getting a table or a spreadsheet is not good enough. There needs to be some explanation, because particularly most trustees, you know, won't know how to interpret a spreadsheet. And are they too detailed? I've already said you don't need to know all the money in and out. You just need to know the sort of like top line figures. And also, can you easily tell what needs discussing? So here's an example of what I do for my childcare charity, which is called Primetime Kids Club. So it's quite a lot out of date, so it's obviously not commercially sensitive. So basically, people wanted to know how financially viable we were, but also they wanted to know, well, how are we doing? So our results are at the bottom of the table. So it's giving the average attendances for the after school club, breakfast club and holiday club, with the actual against our target. And then at the top of the table, we've got a bit of a balance sheet. So it looks at our cash book balance. And then we always invoice in arrears. So at the point of time of the 30th of April, then there was £4,319.80p in invoices for childcare in April. There were some obviously late payers from previous months of 266. So the total there of 27,748.66 is our total cash assets. But then obviously we've got liabilities. So staff are always paid about the third week of each month. So there's usually a week of salaries in April, and that's 500 quid. We pay our energy bill once every 6 months. Transport was when we were using minibuses to pick up kids. Prepayments is for when some people pay in advance. Tax and NI is on what we owe HMRC. And then there's a grant that we've got to use for a particular purpose. So that gives us our total liabilities. And therefore, the real money that we had at the end of that April was the 19,714. And you can see that actually it's gone up slightly from the month before, about 250 quid, 230 quid. And then we compared it with last year, and then at the beginning of the financial year. And this was an okay month. So right at the very bottom, I would just do my narrative, basically saying, you know, surplus of 221, so not a bad month. Just talking about after school club down, breakfast up a bit. However, Easter was very good. So generally all on budget. And that's when I would flag up basically if there are issues that need to be thought about before the meeting. So people get this a week before, and then we discuss it at the board meeting. Anybody want to ask anything at that point? So what I'm saying is that this came out of a discussion at a trustee board meeting about, well, what headline figures did the trustee board want to know? You know. Okay. So some key questions to ask. I think as a charity trustee, this is across a year. This is really sort of starting to summarize it. You know, are we solvent? Will we be in 6 months' time? Are we spending more or less than budgeted? Now, why do we have a surplus or a deficit? As I said, you might actually be in the lucky position of having more money than you need, and therefore you can think about, well, actually, what service will we expand, or what new service will we do, or what bit of kit needs to be replaced now? Do we have enough in reserves? And again, if more, what should we use them on? And do we have enough income diversity? As I said earlier, you know, you basically are going to be precarious if you're just reliant on particularly one form of income. Are we spending our money in line with our objects? Matching the spend against your charitable objects. But then, very importantly, and that's what charities are all about, what's the impact of our spending? What's the difference that's being made? And are we doing it as efficiently and as effectively as possible? Are we getting the maximum bangs for our bucks? Just because you've been running the same service for 10 years and it breaks even, is it still the best way of delivering your charitable objects? I'll send this, I won't go through this now, but the Association of Chairs has this quite useful self-assessment, and I've just summarized it here, but I'll send it to you. It's like a PDF that you basically get your trustees to individually score, and then you share all the results and you come up about maybe how you improve your charity, your financial management. Right, questions? I know it's an awful lot to take in.
Can I ask you about the independent examination? Because we've been very fortunate when we were very small we decided to have an independent examination straight away to get in the habit. So we had a couple of pro bono people who we weren't connected to. And then it became that we became too connected to, so we didn't want to use them because they weren't independent anymore. And we're now at the point where we think we need to pay. Is there a process in which, I mean, we've obviously approached a couple of accountants who do charity IE, but is there a better way to do this?
Yeah, I guess it depends. In a sense, you don't really need to find anybody qualified until your turnover is 100,000.
No.
So, for instance, Prime Time's turnover is about 60k, and so the guidance the Charity Commission says, like how do you decide who to ask to do your independent examination? It's somebody who's got the requisite skills. So we approached somebody who used to be chair of finance at one of the schools that we did the childcare for, and asked him, and he's a statistician by profession. So obviously very used to looking at spreadsheets, and obviously had that experience of looking at school finances when he was chair of that. And in fact, he does it for basically I give him about 30 quid's worth of gifts each year. He doesn't want to be paid to do it. And in terms of about being independent, actually the independence is as long as they are not a member of the board or in a relationship with a member of the board, i.e. personal or in business, they don't have to be. So it could be somebody, if you've got a wider membership or a supporter membership, that basically then you feel has got the right skills to do it. Other people have managed to do, like retired accountants, for instance, or retired people from the banking profession, particularly those people who basically have share the passion for the cause. So they will volunteer to do it, basically, which is like what our IE is doing. So once your income is over 100,000, then actually you have to start looking at people who have got a particular qualification. So you could ask around to try and find a volunteer who will do it, either known to you or almost advertising someone who then might, to say, share your cause.
Yes, thank you. I think I was being too cautious because thinking a neighbour wasn't independent enough, but I think
an independent examiner is a legally binding responsibility. So I would always say to people, get them to look at the Charity Commission, because once they sign the independent examination, they are signing that they have done all these things, and it could come back to bite them on the bottom if actually they're just signing it all off, which I have come across some independent examiners. It was a friend of the treasurer who basically just sign this, they just sign it without even looking at anything,
Okay, thank you, that's really helpful.
Well, if it's nothing now, as I said, anything occurs to you, you've got my contact details. Right, we want you to quickly do the evaluation for tonight, because it's very useful feedback. Avril, are you able to paste it into the chat? Avril? Oh, you're muted, Avril.
There we go. Hold on, I've just got to get the chat up. Here we go. Bear with me a second.
Yeah, so it's obviously really useful for us to get feedback to improve the way we do training, but it's also obviously useful when we do our trustees annual report, so we can talk about the difference that our work makes, and obviously also for our funders as well. So this all gets collated, it's anonymous, but it's useful if you, it should take you a couple of minutes. Is it there yet, Avril?
Yep, should be there.
Yeah, if you quickly click that, and then I'll just do a final couple of slides.
I can't see anything. I don't know what's supposed to be appearing.
No, I can't either.
Oh.
Can you see it, Steve?
Let's have a look. So have you got the chat box open, everyone?
Yep.
Oh, if you click chat, have you got usually on the left, on the right hand side of the screen, there's a chat box appears?
Mine's right. Mine's slap bang in the middle. That's what was throwing
Oh,
me.
okay.
But I thought it was because I wasn't used to Zoom. Mine's right in the middle of my screen.
Are people still not apt?
Yeah, I've got that open. I still can't see anything.
Oh, hang on. It's not an hyperlink, is it?
It was the link that we were sent over. Yeah, it's a hyperlink. Let me
try.
Hang on a minute. Let's just try it again.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's a hyperlink, is it?
Let me just try. And I'm just having another go. It's not showing the line underneath, which suggests to me it's not, but I'm copying it from a hyperlink.
Is anybody managing to get it to open?
Oh, I've got it, but it's not a hyperlink.
Yeah, it seems to be working.
How strange. It's working for some people and not others.
So you're actually getting in and seeing the questions, yeah?
No.
Yeah,
Sue is.
Yeah.
it might be because I'm on an iPad and it just does things that
Slightly
seem
differently.
cool.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it a Survey Monkey based?
Yeah.
Yeah,
It doesn't want,
but I can't open it.
You can't open it, so it's not working as a hyperlink.
Can we cut and paste it?
You could do if you know how to do that. So yeah, if you go into your browser, and hopefully it will open. If not, we'll send this to you in the email for you to do.
I can't, it won't let me actually complete any of the fields, even though I've got the survey in front of me.
So, oh, really?
Yeah, I'm trying to write my name and it's like, nope, sorry, don't want your name.
Oh, okay.
Nope, don't
All right.
want that.
We'll get
It's
Chris.
working for me.
Oh,
Yeah.
Sorry, who?
Yeah,
Who's that?
Karen.
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 Okay.
I've pasted it into Chrome and it's working.
Okay. All right. Well, okay. So you're not.
It's not working.
Give up. We'll come in the email for you to fill in. Okay. Right. So just to finish off.
Oh, stop. Okay.
So a few summaries really. So it's to make sure charity has the money it needs, that it protects the money it does have, that it spends its money sensibly as soon as you can on the activities it was raised for, that it follows the law, including preparing reports and accounts to send to the Charity Commission and Companies House if you're a charitable company, and does not break rules in the governing document. So I always say this to charities is, okay, there's stuff in the law, but always double check your governing document doesn't sort of like say something that restricts you more than the law does. Okay, so always read that as well, just to make sure you don't fall foul of that. as I said right at the very beginning, really, okay, I know this has been 2 hours of detail, but actually, as long as whenever you've got a financial decision to be made, that you act in the best interest of your charity and its beneficiaries, then you'll be fine. The detail in the last 2 hours, or if you read more stuff on the Charity Commission website or more stuff from CAN, will just perhaps help you do that more efficiently and effectively. There are some places, obviously, for ongoing help and support. You know, come to us in the first instance. We can give you a bespoke answer. There is some stuff on the Charity Commission, so stuff around the internal financial controls. And then if you haven't come across the new 5-minute reads that the Charity Commission have been doing, they're very, very good. They include some reading, but also little cartoon videos, and two most relevant: managing charity finances, and also the what to send to the Charity Commission and how to get help. We'll cover the stuff around reporting, and then the Charity Commission has a whole host of documents under this title, Charity Money, Tax and Accounts, which is really detailed stuff. I think for most charity trustees, you probably won't necessarily want to read that. If you've got someone like a treasurer or someone who's taking, or a finance committee, then perhaps they would actually want to look at those in a bit more detail. I already mentioned about how useful the fundraising code is. So there's a hyperlink to that when you get the slides. And the other good guides around, again, if you haven't found them, is the St. Vincent Made Simple. St. Vincent is probably the best known national accountancy firm that only works with not-for-profits, doesn't do any private sector work at all. And they have some very good simple guides on all hosts of things, very well written, only usually about like 5 to 10 pages depending on the topic. Very good summaries on all sorts of things like trading, gift aid, tax, investments, reserves, and so on. So always a good sort of thing to go and look at. So probably maybe in the next few days, I know Chris is doing other things this week, or it might be early next week, you'll get an email from Chris that will include a copy of this presentation, a couple of other bits and pieces I said I would attach, and the link to a video of tonight, and a link to the evaluation form for you to fill in. Sorry it didn't work tonight, a glitch obviously in our system. And that's it. Well, thank you very much for spending this evening. At least you didn't have to drive in the fastening cold, freezy weather to get somewhere. So you're in the comfort of your own homes. Hope it was useful. As I said, if you've got any questions and queries, don't hesitate to contact me in the first instance. Okay, well, thanks very much. And
thank you very much.
Hope it was
Thank
useful.
you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I'll stop recording, Steve. I'm just going to stop doing that and see what it says. Are you sure to stop recording?